Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. So today we're going to have a look at continuous AWS observability with Sumo Logic. My name is Ulf Andreasson. I'm a Swedish person living in Sweden, of course, and working for Sumo Logic. So a bit of background around me. I've been with Sumo for about 3 years and kind of helping the sales teams here with anything technical. So, happy to do this with you guys. In the chat window, you can, of course, ask questions, and I'm going to try to kind of cover those off as we go along. But we're also going to have a Q&A session in the end of it. So we'll see how it goes. But basically, I'm happy for any questions or any kind of interactions you guys want to have. So with that, we'll get a bit of an agenda here. So I want to kind of take you through that. So just a brief overlook or intro to Sumo Logic. And then, of course, we're going to focus on the AWS observability solution that we have. And we'll do that mainly by sort of looking at a demo. And as I said, we're going to have some Q&A and just give you a quick sort of link into how to get started with using Sumo. So hoping that's going to sort of make it worthwhile for you. With that, Sumo Logic is a continuous intelligence platform, which really means that we provide this as a service for you, and we sort of bring in all the machine data or sort of logs, metrics, events, traces, any kind of data really that could be useful for analyzing what goes in your IT environment or in your sort of digital environment. So, regardless if it's structured, unstructured, or what kind of structure it is, and pretty much regardless of what type of data it is, as long as we can read it, as in text-based, we kind of bring that in, we, index it, we store it, we make it available for analytics, and we also do a lot of analytics out of the box. And really, from your perspective, once all this is set up and we get data flowing in, then it's just a question of different personalities within your company, how to analyze and how to make use of this data. And of course, really make use of insights rather than sort of just data or information. So that's really what we're trying to do. Now, the way we do this, as I said, is through a cloud native platform that really kind of is a multi-tenant platform. But for you, what really matters there is that the scalability is effectively, infinite. The flexibility in the licensing and the cost means that you pay for what you use and you really have no overages or anything like that. And then we make use of a lot of different sort of analytics, machine learning and all these kind of things in the platform to kind of really, take away most of the burden from your perspective. Now, of course, if you're going to store your data in a platform like ours, you want it to be secured. So Sumo is sort of running on top of AWS. And with that, we have a lot of different certifications and attestations that we've achieved through the years. And so we typically, I would argue that we're probably one of the most sort of secure and regulated providers of this type of service out there. And the basics is that any data that goes in, as in over the network, or any data that's stored in Sumo is always encrypted. And its encryption keys can rotate it on a 24-hour basis, and there's always 2 of them. And, there's a lot of kind of security in mind, but it's also, attested to the FedRAMP sort of model, as well as all these different sort of ISO 27700 or PCI and SOC stations if need be, right? So the point is that you can be a kind of you can trust, and you can be sure that sort of Sumo is going to take well care of you. Now, as we're going to speak about AWS, what I want to say is that although AWS is an incredibly large kind of part of the different cloud providers out there, or a very large cloud provider out there. But when we look at the data that's in Sumo, it's not the only sort of data there. We actually have a lot of on-prem systems in, so pretty much every customer has a bit of on-prem and a bit of cloud. There's only kind of a small fraction who's kind of cloud native completely and things like that, right? So when we look at it, there's always going to be this mix, even if it's not multi-cloud, there's a lot of different cloud vendors being used. And this data here is actually taken from our continuous intelligence report, which basically means that what we do is that we can look at all the customers that are using Sumo, which is over 2,000 customers, and we can then sort of draw some insights from that. So you can just go to this link here, the continuous intelligence report, and download this report and actually see a lot of insights there yourself, right? And the reason I'm kind of showing you this is, of course, that, so yeah, you saw that I kind of stole that screenshot from here, but the really interesting thing is that the number of services being used in this case in AWS is kind of increasing. So the most common service is essentially EC2. IAM is of course going to be there because everyone needs to have it. S3 buckets are typically also very used. Then you have sort of Lambdas and SNS and CloudTrail and all the other things. But it's quite interesting because you can really see how the median number of AWS services is increasing over time. And looking back in 2018 and 2017, this was even lower. So this is kind of just ramping up all the time, right? And the reason I want to highlight this is that kind of comes to, and that shows us the complexity in what we're seeing here, right? So a modern application today is typically microservices based. It's maybe running in some Kubernetes cluster, maybe kind of running on multiple different clusters and things like that, and multi-cloud and all those kind of things. And then, depending on if the application is stateful, stateless, or whatever it is, right? There's a lot of different things that needs to be taken care of here. And this is kind of really why we started to develop what we call the AWS Observability solution. Because and this is not just about observability, it actually includes things like the root cause explorer and some other sort of alerting and dashboard and other content in there. But basically what we're trying to do is that to give you a holistic overview of what you have in AWS in combination with really be able to kind of drill down into the details, also be able to look at all the different data sources you may have. So you can pivot from metrics into logs or traces and logs and all those kind of things. So it really makes it very useful from that perspective. Another aspect of collecting the data is that metadata is becoming more and more important. So the way we do this is that we're effectively using CloudFormation template, and there's going to be a version of that being a Terraform template as well. But right now we have a CloudFormation template that will ask you what data sources you would want to collect, and effectively go and collect those depending on the account or the region. So you can stack these CloudFormation templates as well. So you effectively only have one template that goes and collects everything from all the different accounts you have and from all the different regions you have, with only one sort of stacked set. So this makes it be a non-event of actually collecting the data. And it isn't just about collecting the sort of machine data, but it's also tagging all that machine data with different tags, different sort of enrichment that we take out of the box and all those kind of things. And then it's also about setting up everything on the Sumo side and making it really consumable for you in a very simplistic way. And running this CloudFormation template will take care of all those things, and it will do that. So within 10 minutes, you can just go into Sumo and you can start to look at your environment. And that really is kind of the benefit of using something like AWS Observability solution. So with that, actually, before we do that, let me show you another thing, because I did see some questions here with regards to security. So AWS Observability, as you can expect, is kind of focused on observability and really looking at the operational and dev side of it. But from a security perspective, we also have something called the AWS Quick Start, which kind of is very much doing the same thing. Another CloudFormation template that basically will go and collect the different security services, and it will kind of set up the different ways we collect data, and then we'll kind of set up the Sumo side of it as well. So this does have sort of the same capabilities when it comes to security, although it's kind of a slightly separate way of doing it, but it's very similar, but still sort of different. But yeah, so let's dive into the demo. And yeah, I see no questions, anything like that. So in the demo, or in your environment here, like a Sumo environment like this, what you would do is you would go and open up the Explorer tab. And the Explorer tab will take you into, in this case, I've had used AWS Observability before I kind of closed down this session. But basically, you can look at things like Kubernetes deployments or application service views, which basically means from a tracing perspective. So there's a lot of different solutions we have here, but we're going to focus on the AWS Observability. Here you can see that I got 4 different accounts. I can name these whatever I want, and you know, I got a mobile banking app, as you can imagine, and I got some dev and prod and stage accounts here. So when I open up the accounts, I can see the different regions, and when I open up the regions, I can see the different data services. And the beauty here, and why we call this an Explorer, is that it basically shows you the hierarchy on the left-hand side, and it brings up the relevant dashboard on the right-hand side. And what is relevant, you can affect. So if you think that this is maybe not what you would want to see initially, you can change that. Anything you see in here, you can pretty much change. But just to kind of give it some context is that, okay, so now we're looking at US East region in the prod account. And if I want to go down to EC2, I can see all the different sort of instances here on the left-hand side, but I can also see all the instances here. And I can see these depending on what I'm looking at. So if I'm looking at CPU utilization, I see that some of these are having quite high utilization compared to others. We're trying to give you as much information as possible immediately here, but you know, essentially this is a bit of a kind of infrastructure and just showing you what people are typically looking for. So you can see the combined CPU utilization, which I would argue isn't necessarily that sort of useful. But you can also see the different sort of instances or CPU utilization per instance type or load average in general, right? So there's a lot sort of information here to look at. Now, if it makes sense or not, you can always drill down into these things. So when I click on this one here, right, it takes up the entity browser on the right-hand side. And what I can see here is that I can actually go straight into logs for this specific instance, or I can go into the logs that has some kind of error message within it. I can see recommended dashboard. So I may want to go into the EC2 metrics overview, which basically is where I am. So, but I may want to look at Elasticache or network load balancer or something else that I may be using. I can also go into the instance itself or kind of where I'm coming from, like the region and the account. So, you know, instance names are not necessarily the easiest thing in AWS. So it's actually quite sort of common that you would use this to just get into an instance. Now, of course, I have that instance here. You can also see the filtering up here, right? So this is a different way of kind of seeing or viewing this. And now I just have a summary of this. So if I want to go and look at my memory consumption for that instance, you know, this is just data that comes out of the system that we can use. And just note, I mean, all of this data we cannot collect that. So this is not dependent on the CloudWatch metrics or anything like that. So there's no custom metrics or anything like that. This is just, pure metrics that comes out of any Linux type system or Windows type system, and you would just see that here. So the beauty is kind of that it's really simple, and it kind of, it does what it says, so to speak. Now, not everyone's kind of that interested in EC2 instances, maybe. So let's look at something more sort of modern in the way of Lambdas. So here we're still within the same account, same region, but I'm looking at the Lambda invocations taking place here, right? So I can see the kind of call locations. I can see a lot of statistics around the most used services or the most used IAM roles and things like that. And of course, also the number of invocations today compared to yesterday. So I saw that I had a bit of a kind of, it's gone down a bit compared to yesterday. But I mean, this is on 24 hours as well. So I could look at this for like the last 15 minutes. And then it shows me a bit of difference. And yeah, I also have last week here. So there's actually 3 different metrics I'm looking at. But I mean, again, this is kind of the complete view of this. So what I can do is that if I'm interested in a specific functions, I can go into that too, right? So here's that specific function for the last 24 hours and a lot more details specifically with regard to that function. So we're trying to kind of really be able to give you that holistic view, but you can also drill down and see all the details. Now, as I said, you can have different dashboards and we can take you into whatever is relevant from you. So if you're interested in this from a security perspective, maybe the threat intel dashboard would be interesting for you to take a look at. What we do with threat intel is that we are effectively getting a threat intel feed from CrowdStrike. And we can take that feed and we can then sort of associate, or we can correlate, I should say, not associate, but we can correlate all that data that comes from CrowdStrike with what happens in your environment. So when we see things like an IP address, we can check against the CrowdStrike database and we can see if there's any bad actors being associated with that IP address. And as you can see here, Mummy Spider is coming up quite a few number of times. And that could mean that maybe I should start to look into this a bit more. If I'm seeing sort of increased activity here, this is definitely something I want to take a look at. So although this is an observability solution, there's always kind of some of this, security related data in it as well. So we just want to make sure that it's, what you have is basically not just kind of looking at from a operational or kind of things like that, but, really make it available and kind of insightful for you to make use of Sumo. Now, coming back to the kind of holistic view of Lambda invocations, one thing that I can see here is that I got quite a few number of errors here for this, again, the last 24 hours, but still. And when I look at it, I can actually see that there's one specific function that is kind of failing a lot. As you can see, the light blue color here, that means that it's basically failing. While the dark blue is kind of successful as well. So most of the functions here are having a bit of a both, which you probably will see. But in this case, this specifically, it's just kind of highlighting that, I'm failing consistently on this one. So what I could do is I could go into kind of all the logs for that function. So, and it's going to give me this kind of view, but I can also go straight into the kind of error logs here. And one of the beauties as well, not necessarily just diving into the logs and that, but you can also use the log browser here. And here I can see that I get a database authentication problem with invalid credentials in pretty much all of those 720. I got 2 empty strings here, but all of those kind of error messages are basically with regards to database authentication issue. So that kind of gives me a bit of like head start, so to speak. And And now I can sort of look into this a bit deeper, right? So first of all, what I would probably want to do is I want to go and check for this specific function. And I can do that in multiple ways, but now I just kind of went through the billing info here. So I can see that, we had, a large part of this is actually here, right? Now, when I can see the most sort of frequent function and operations here, or sorry, function operations or operations to this kind of function. And what I will do here is again, open up that in search, and I see the functions here, but what I want to do from there is that the event name is actually listing the update function configurations here that's taken place twice. So what I want to do is make use of all the information we have in there. So now I can see that the user Mark Smith has actually been in here and changed the configuration, and he did this kind of yesterday evening. Let's see, it's 9th, yeah. So yesterday afternoon, evening, he kind of changed the configuration here. Obviously, this is kind of something that probably could be a reason for it, right? So I would speak to Mark and kind of say that you need to take a look at this because it's been consistently failing since you basically did this update. So that's one way of using kind of Sumo from that perspective, and really be able to kind of dive straight into kind of seeing what what is happening here. Another thing that we can do here is that, coming back up to the prod view, as you saw, I can have different dashboards. So if I'm looking at this from a DevSecOps perspective, I may have a dashboard looking like this. I mean, this is just sort of an example of what you may want to look at. But you could also have sort of more service details, specifically with maybe an application that you're running in here. So, we get a booking application running here. So we can see sort of when we have failures in the booking system compared to successes, and here's kind of been increasing, and suddenly we started to see a lot more failures. We can also detect these kind of error messages throughout the system, right? And we can sort of highlight this in different ways you want to visualize this. So it's kind of the charging and the processing cart is basically failing here with regards to different functions. And also I can correlate this data. So I can see sort of like, and I can always drill into these a bit more, right? But I can kind of really see when something like an error count is increasing, I can again sort of dive deeper into this. So if I maybe want to look at the error logs for this, I can do that. Now it's showing me this. So let me just take away this and run the query again. And someone was asking sort of examples of how we're using machine learning and advanced analytics here. So now I got roughly about 230 error logs here. And I probably should have taken sort of all the logs, but basically what I can do here is use something called log reduce. Log reduce is a machine learning clustering technology that we use to sort of identify similar log messages. So it's not syntactically exactly the same, but it's similar messages that could relate to each other. And, with wording and sort of, all the different kinds of unstructured data and stuff like that, it's not necessarily that simple. But what we can see here is that quite a few of the log messages coming into this system is actually talking about a handshake error, an SSL routine handshake certificate problem. So just looking at this, I can expect that probably something has changed with regards to the kind of certificate here. And maybe that's kind of what I should focus on if I want to try to understand what's happening with my application here and why it suddenly starts to kind of have an increased error rate. So again, having sort of having log reduce being able to help me. Now, what I can do as well is that I can actually do something called log compare. And that would take the same sort of error messages and the same, go to the time frame of my choosing, so maybe 24 hours ago, and compare how many log messages came out at that time frame, and then sort of compare the two so I can see if this sort of type of log message has increased or decreased from sort of 24 hours ago. So there's a lot of smart things you can do with Sumo, not necessarily have to delve deep down into the kind of log lines themselves, but just basically sort of make use of what you have in there. Yes, so with that in mind, what we also can do, because I mean, being able to look at an environment that is large is one thing. But now, if I want to kind of try to be more effective and I want to look at things that are standing out. So for example, you know, everyone's got a bit of load balancers and application load balancers and all these kind of stuff, right? So I can see that these are high utilized, you know, there's a lot of threats against them and stuff like that. But what I also can see, and specifically when I go deeper into here, I can see I get two very distinct spikes with regards to 500 errors in them. And you know, I mean, this one happened like, what, 3 o'clock in the night, and this one happened 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So obviously this is demo system and we're ingesting sort of a bit of errors into it and trying to kind of make smart things there. But the problem we have is that the system is also learning. So we have to kind of change things around, right? But what I can do here is that I can actually go into something called events of interest. So I went from actually looking at the overview of this, where I kind of see these two spikes. Now, if I want to go into the events of interest, what this tells me is that things that are anomalies, you know, outliers to what I would expect to see in the system. So I can dig deeper into the kind of real root cause explorer, which basically would show me these events again. And what I can see here is effectively those kind of two spikes that we saw in the overview dashboard. But here I got a lot more information. I get the spike sort of specifically highlighted here, together with what happened like 1 day ago, 24 hours ago. So I can really see that this is kind of a true spike. This is not something that sort of slightly goes up or goes down or something like that. And this is why we also identify it, right? We've sort of seen this metric, we've learned how it typically acts and behaves, and then suddenly we see that this is a spike. And the details of the spike is that it goes up 700% for 20 minutes. Where normally it would be a lot less. I can also see exactly where it is, you know, prod, US East 1 and all those kind of things. I mean, we were looking at that, so that maybe isn't kind of that much details. But, you know, it just gives me a lot of information here. Now, what I've done here, because we sort of came from where we came from, I actually filtered on just ELB events, but let me clear this one out. And now you can see that there's some other events here taking place as well. I still want to focus on the issues we had here, so I can just kind of dig deeper into that. And I'm a bit of a, oh, okay. Yeah, so I can sort of dig deeper into that and just to kind of show you as well, you know, this is not just AWS, but you can do this for Kubernetes or for tracing as well, and, you know, advanced sort of analytics with regards to application services. You can also cater for the seasonality or the kind of drift that you're interested in. So there's a lot of kind of things that you can influence it, not just the kind of filtering of data or any kind of specific metric, but there's a lot of capabilities in here. Now, these signals that we're talking about is the kind of signals that's coming from, you know, Google and the SRE practice. So typically you would look at something like load availability issues, latency errors, and throughput sort of throughput implications. And this kind of is a bit of a school book example, because we start to see that there's a DynamoDB bottleneck here. Or actually, let me take this from the back end. So we see the kind of ELB error. This is where we started. But when I open up for seeing more things, we actually saw that there was some EC2 latency. And when I click on this is not just one EC2 instance. This is actually a grouped event. So multiple different EC2 instances have seen sort of the increased CPU, latency here with regards to this system, right? So I can go deep into these ones as well. So this is one of the specific events, and I can, all of these events I can go deep into. So the beauty is that not only we're highlighting any kind of specific metric, but we're also able to cater for any group metrics, anything like that. So these EC2 latencies kind of really were before the error messages. And before those, we also had some bottlenecks. Again, CPU load average. And we also saw the DynamoDB bottleneck here. So, and this kind of right throttle event. So, something is developing here, and this has been going up quite heavily, like say 1000% for 20 minutes. So, something's going on here. Now, what I would want to investigate here, because this is a DynamoDB and it's a bottleneck. So I'm intrigued to kind of go in to look at any kind of changes that happen here. It could be that there's some kind of log event, but in this case, as I said, this is a demo environment. We kind of need to play with what we can play with, so to speak. And what I want to go in to see is a kind of events or configuration configuration events that could have taken place here. From this view, I can see that, basically there's a couple of arrows here and all the different table events. There's been some update table events here according to sort of describe table and stuff like that. So let's dig deeper into that as well. And again, I'll make use of the field browser and I will really look at the event name. And I can see I got 5 events that are update table, and I will take a deeper look at those. And now when I go down the list here, I can see that here is actually an event that is the kind of culprit. Now, what we normally have is read capacity units of 5. So someone, as in Ankit, has gone in and changed this down to 2, which basically causes DynamoDB to sort of start a bottleneck, which then causes EC2 instances to have increased latency, which in the end is kind of causing the load balancers to kind of really spike up in the 500x or 500 numbers. So, I mean, that's kind of something that really causes these kind of issues. Now, what I would want to do, first of all, I would go and speak to Ankit and we'll make sure that we kind of increase these capacity units again on the DynamoDB database. But the next thing I would do is actually make sure that I'm not getting into this situation again. So I would go into my sort of alerting here. And this is kind of out of the box. I haven't really enabled any of these, but of course, maybe I would be looking for the load balancers and the, being highlighted of when we start to develop any kind of application load balancers issue with high sort of 500x numbers. So, and I can see some of that here, right? So what I'm saying here is I got 2 sort of search queries and I'm combining these with kind of really trying to see where this is happening, right? So this is the beauty as well. Not only can you do sort of searches based on metrics, you can also create searches based on logs, and you can have multiple of those. And then you can also do arithmetic based on the different results from these searches, right? So search A is kind of running here and collecting the numbers from there. And then I got the request count. I can compare these to each other, and effectively the search query C here is what I'm actually going to be using. I can, of course, define if this is going to be critical or warning or just maybe some missing data there. And then, of course, I can choose how do I want to be notified. So in my case, I just want to, there's many different sort of connections I can use here, anything from Jira, from ServiceNow, Microsoft Teams, or kind of other systems, Opsgenie or whatever it may be. But I should also have a Slack channel here. So then I can influence the sort of data that's going to be sent to that Slack channel, and I can have multiple notifications as well. So maybe you want to have to Slack and to email or to specific group of people or whatever it is. And that's pretty much what you would do. So the reason why these are not enabled out of the box is, of course, that we don't know how you want to alert people. So we provide all the information, but you just need to go in and enable those and cannot say, what kind of notification you want to have. So that's pretty much what you would do and how you would handle this. I'm not going to create this sort of alert because we all have many of them coming into different aspects of Sumo. But that's effectively what we would do. So yeah, that is kind of concluding the demo per se. I just want to make sure, yeah, we've covered that. So let me take you back to the slides, also making sure we sort of, so we did sort of go through, looked at the, out-of-the-box content for much of this, the simplicity. We didn't really kind of start the collection or anything like that, but essentially that is a question of running CloudFormation template. And then looking at the AWS Observability solution and the root cause explorer, right? Observability solution to really be able to understand how things relate to each other, using the enrichment to kind of see how that does kind of relate to each other, but also then the root cause explorer to be able to that we sort of out of the box can identify any kind of metrics that is starting to deviate or behaves like an anomaly or really being an outlier. And this is all driven by different kind of machine learning patterns we have in there to really kind of see the exceptions there. And of course, once you start to use the root cause explorer and collect all this information, it's going to take some time for it to build up. We talk about days, weeks, depending on the seasonality in your product, so to speak. But that's effectively what it is. And then in the end of that, we really started to kind of use alerting to make sure that we can be more proactive and really finding out. But that said, there's always going to be the challenge of like how much alerting do you want to have versus kind of looking at the dashboards and trying to figure out things yourself, right? So, but you have the option of using a healthy sort of, combination of all of them. So I'm hoping that's kind of giving you a lot of information and thoughts. This is just kind of summarizing more from a Sumo platform, but we've already touched on that and much of what we do and how we kind of use that. So any kind of questions you may have, happy to kind of respond to anything. One question I see is that someone's asking for, our SIM capabilities. And actually, just to kind of quickly show you, when using Sumo, you have sort of, Sumo is kind of, you have it all there. The beauty with Sumo is that you can use all that data for, your DevOps kind of side, your operations side, your SIM perspective. So all that same data that comes from AWS, it just goes into our other kind of interface that basically is the kind of SIM. And the reason we have it like this is that this was kind of developed from a gaming perspective and trying to kind of remove that, alert fatigue. The problem is that there's typically so many alerts and signals coming from a SIM system. So we need to do something smarter than just kind of alerting on pretty much everything we can see and move. So what we do here is that not necessarily all data has to go into the SIM as well, because of course the SIM is kind of more focused on the security side. So any operational data is not necessarily going into the SIM, but still, if we're collecting something like 6 million records, basically log lines or sort of information that comes into a SIM, maybe, we would see something like 86,000 alerts. And this is only for the last 24 hours. So, of course, when you come in the morning, you're never going to be able to handle those 87,000 alerts. What you would do is you would start to say, like, okay, I look at anything that has severity of higher than 7, and then I start to look at that. Sumo has a much better way of handling this. And this is really the kind of usage of insights. Because what we do is that we correlate all the kind of information that takes place here. So if I look at this last sort of insight that's been created, which basically is a exfiltration and credential access, I go into this, and this is all following the MITRE ATT&CK framework. But what really happens here, so the first incident with regards to this system is a AWS guard duty alert, an unauthorized access to that instance. And that's basically this first instance here, or this first indicator here. And now, after some time, we start to see that there's another one here, a guard duty alert of instance credential exfiltration. And then we continue to follow this system because this has now raised the interest of us. And we continue to follow this. And basically, later on here, we can see that there's another alert being taking place here as well, right? So the beauty with this is that Sumo will start to look at a system as soon as we see some kind of incident, and then we'll track that for another fortnight, so 14 days, and we'll basically build up all these things. And when we have enough events, so even if the severity is very low, when we have enough events and when sort of something starts to look like a proper incident, that's when we fire what we call is an insight. So think of it like a correlated alerts. We've done correlation twice. First of all, to find the alerts, then we take those alerts and really correlate those into what we call an incident. An insight. And this is really the beauty of it, because the number of insights you've had for the last 24 hours is 8. So you can easily take a look at these and just go through, not just look at them, but you get this Kanban board, and you can do, now we're filtering on these ones only, but basically you can just kind of take this one and say like, okay, I'm actually in progress now. So I've started looking at this, and of course you can assign it to yourself and all those kind of things as well. So a lot of good things there. Actually, talking about that, we were just given an award for that yesterday. So the SC Media in the UK here gave us the best sort of SIM, the best cloud SIM here as kind of the, as an award in that paper. Another thing that goes on from a security perspective is that we right now, today, sort of later on today in the afternoon here in Europe, we are starting the modern, actually it's day 2 of the Modern SOC Summit. So I urge you to kind of take a look at that, register. You will kind of, if you go to sumologic.com, you'll see the links there and you can go register. And it's a lot of interesting information that's taking place. That said, there's also the AWS Summit going on right now, and Sumo is of course there. And again, we're talking about sort of RC, as in root cause explorer, and AWS observability. So there's a lot of things happening here. So I think that was, let me see, any other questions? Actually, yeah, one question here with regards to CI/CD integrations. We have another solution called the software development optimization. And software development optimization is actually looking at the DORA metrics. So, we have all the information about Jenkins or any kind of CI/CD tools in there. you can just basically look at that and calculate your DORA metrics. And DORA is this consortium, but sort of DevOps best practices. And you can calculate those, and you can effectively get sort of comparable numbers, which you can use to kind of measure yourself or compare yourself to others in the same industry. So the beauty with this is that this really kind of tells you how successful you are with your integrations and deployments. And there's a lot more sort of, there's a lot more kind of details in what you can get here. But yeah, happy to kind of take you through that some other time. And likewise, you know, with me and my team here in Sumo, you know, if there's anything you want to do, just reach out to us. You know, going to sumologic.com, you can start your first free trial here. You get 30 days off, and or 30 days, not off, but 30 days, and you can effectively use the full functionality of Sumo. And we're here to help. So, I mean, anything, just send me an email or reach out to any of my colleagues in Sumo, and we would be happy to help you. So with that, I don't see any other question or anything like that. So with that, I want to thank you. Yeah, have fun and try out Sumo. Thank you.